on this computer. Welcome everyone to January 27th Java Operators Meeting. Hope everyone is having a good year so far. Let me share the agenda. Share screen. This one. That. Okie dokie. Do we have any new faces this morning? Let me look. I don't see anyone new. Not today, anyway. All right. Anything anyone wants to bring up or talk about?
I have some updates, but if anything more important.
I don't think so. You need to share your screen, or is this?
Yeah, just basically what we worked about this week is a bunch of issues. Maybe I can share some.
Okay.
So first we were discussing how to do dependent resources more, and there is a progress on that. The decision is not made. There was a issue created about the layered architecture, or the current approach. There is a long discussion how to approach this and why. That's one topic. Yeah, and more and more people asking us to showcase the testing of the operator. So in general, so I guess we will have to kind of make some document and create some nice example of how to test depth operators. And yeah, what I was working on mainly is also, yes, there are some issues which are quite interesting. And I'm wondering how this is solved in control runtime. I will have to probably check it or ask it. It's there is one interesting issue when we have an informer in place, we create a resource, and on that resource we do some update in some reconciliation loop, and then we instantly receive the basically the event again about this resource, and basically that's not desirable. We watch the version, how do you call it, observed generation in the custom resources, but this is not really applicable here because we don't control that. So this is a dependent resource which we update, and the informer just triggers an event and the reconciliation again. Then we obviously don't update it again and it's settled. But so basically one solution to put here is just to somehow mark the resource version in the informer, and we receive the event. We just compare the resource version with the same as the resource version just we updated, or after the update we received, and then just skip the propagation of that event. If this is clear, I don't know. And yeah, and then remove it from this very temporal cache.
So is this, I'm going to rephrase what I think I heard you say, which is basically you get an event, you reconcile it, then you get another event, but it has the cached version in it. So it's an older one?
No. It's okay. It's we receive an event, we execute the reconciliation, and in that reconciliation, we update, for example, a deployment that we created. And this deployment, we receive then an event about the change of this deployment.
The one you just made.
What I made, and we reconcile again. And this second reconciliation is basically this event shouldn't be propagated because
Oh, I see. So you updated the deployment, not necessarily because there was a deployment event, but it could have been a secondary. The deployment object that you updated might be a secondary resource, but you
yes,
then
yes,
get an event that is talking about that specific change.
yeah,
Normally, the way I understand the control loops, this basically would be a no-op because you would make the change. Let's say you set the value to whatever, it's 10 or something, and when you come back, you'll get the event that said 10. If that matches what you expected it to be, because you're basically making the change to put the cluster in a particular state that you need it to be in. So if you set
yes.
the value to 10 and then an event comes in that said deployment change and that happened to be the one you just did, you should be able to look at it and say, oh, that's in the same state that I want it to be. So then it's done.
Yes, and this is what's already happening.
Okay.
So this is yeah, but the problem is that we have to look. So it's basically it could be optimized in a way that we receive the event after the deployment changed. We see that this event has the same resource version as the updated deployment. So it didn't really change between. So we have a match in the resource version that we did. So we did the update to get to this resource version. So we don't have to even care about this event. We can just ignore it.
Yes. Okay. So when you made the change to the deployment, you end up with a resource version. When the event comes back in, it is so you're asking if it's okay to compare the resource version and basically ignore the event?
Yeah, yes, yes.
Yes, I think that is very common. I've done that in some of my operators because basically I have the object, I have the resource version, and if it hasn't changed, then there's nothing to do.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's
and
safe.
yeah, I think too. The only problem is how to do this in very generic and very elegant way in our informal abstractions. So users don't have to do it explicitly; it just
Okay.
has to kind of out on the mechanism. And there are ways to do it. It's with dependent resources. This will be handled out of the box, and we will maybe for all the layers just an utility that will.
Oh, so then what you're mentioning here is it's not the user in the reconcile loop doing the comparison. You're talking about making that comparison in the Java operator SDK library piece and not sending that to the user.
Yes, this can be
Basically being smart, saying, "Oh, I know there's no sense in sending this. This was not okay. Okay,
Yes, yes, and basically having it out of the box, maybe with a feature flag, so it can be turned off.
yeah,
Uh, but yeah, so I think this is in generally desirable. So
I think that's okay, especially with the feature flag because I know the flag allows you to, by turning it off, you can kind of protect yourself against any like being too aggressive and skipping skipping events. So if you accidentally, let's say our logic is slightly flawed, by allowing it to turn off, we can help folks like, yeah, turn it off and you'll get every event. And then it's up to you again to worry about it while we fix whatever it is. If it's not desirable for someone. I
yeah,
can
yeah.
look to see if controller runtime has anything like this. Um, Typically I've always had my operator always had to deal with it where I got the events and compared to things. But I'll look. I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it's something that would be efficient for the operator author because then they don't have to, it's one less reconcile that gets called.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, okay, Thanks. Actually, one of our users were asking for this, so it's
Okay.
but he's kind of doing it already. It's kind
Awesome.
of a hackable already into the system very nicely. Just I thought it would be nice to have it kind of a good experience and supported by the framework. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's it. If anybody has some. Then we had a small bug. Oh no, it's just basically logging. And what I'm working on is this. We have the bugs delay already. So, and I currently finishing this supporting of multiple versions of CRD. For now, it was a long debate if we need to support this, and then some of our users asked for it. So currently, I'm just finishing the integration test, and it works very nicely, and showcasing how to deal with this. If you CRD has multiple versions of custom resources, and so it's a common issue, but we are getting there with it. It will be finished probably tomorrow. And what we implemented is this. It's already a pull request ready for that. Is the set a maximum delay between reconciliation? Then I renamed it, I think, to interval or period. So it's basically kind of discussed it in on Kubernetes Slack also with others, that it's a quite common practice to, even if you don't have to have I think we already discussed this, but having a fail-safe mechanism to reconcile after a while, even there is no events coming from informers or other sources, and just make sure that each 8 or 10 hours, as we discussed, I think it's already in contra runtime. So, and basically it's there after it's merged from our side too.
It is true that is a very common feature where you have an interval to always run this, even if there are no others. So that way, if the thing has been sitting idle, it's kind of a, is everything really still okay? Or is something else broken that's, not sending me events or something? Let me go check the world. As a parent, this is the equivalent of when your kids are in another room making noise, and when it becomes silent, that's when trouble happens. So this is kind of like that. It's like, well, let me go check. I haven't heard any events. There's nothing coming in. Let's just go check. So yeah, this is a good one.
Yeah, exactly. So it's basically there. I mean, soon. I don't have any much else currently what I'm working on, except that simple prototype from the other approach for dependent resources. And so otherwise we started a little bit thought about discuss the reactive ways and the scaling of operators. I saw them that I found that basically scaling is not there. I mean, having multiple instances operator, there is not in the contra runtime.
Yeah. This is something that comes up often enough, and yet there hasn't been really an answer.
Because I kind of prepared an answer, and not in an issue. I think it's pretty simple to do. But maybe I will bring it up in the next meeting just to have an overview and first I want to put it on paper in an issue. And I think it's fairly simple to implement such thing.
Yeah, the biggest thing is that when you have multiple controllers pulling in, they're all reading in the same events and they're not talking to each other. Yes, and I think that's the part that needs to get solved, is somehow how do you prevent each one doing the same work? And I've heard some folks talk about experimenting and creating, like, separating the queue from the actual controller and having the queue have, like, creating multiple workers to read off of the queue. kind of that approach. But
so I can maybe show. I don't know if others have other questions. I can discuss. I'll tell you how my basically design of how I would do it. I thought about before, and yes, there is this queues and things like that, and there could be a min in the middle service and others I was thinking of, but actually there is I think a very simple solution. So it's not talking about the auto scaling necessary, it's just scaling, like having multiple instances. And if you want to scale up, you might restart the existing instance to have it absolutely consistent and distributed the numbers. But let's say we have 3 operator instances of the same type, operator 1, 2, 3. And the trick is that you want to just handle some of the events of some of the resources. And this is all of them is listening to the Kubernetes API and possible external sources. And I think the simplest way to do is just receive all the events, and we will later discuss how we could optimize even that, not receive all the events. But we receive all the events, and all the event has a resource ID. So all the Kubernetes resource has a name and the namespace pair. Their namespace is not necessarily there, but we don't really care. So what we could do is, this will be a stateful set. It's not deployed as a deployment, but as a stateful set. Okay, we have to verify some details, but basically it will be a stateful set. And so everybody will have an identity 1, 2, 3. And we could just use and hash this and say that, and mod 3. Mod is the mathematical mod. I don't know, it's in English is I think module. I don't know. So we say that if we just hash the name and the namespace to a binary format, and we mod it with 3, then we say that, okay, this will have a number 1, 2, or 3. And this is none, and this is equals to the stateful state index. Then we will just process the events regarding those resources where this equation is equals to the stateful set index.
Okay, so you're basically saying every event comes in, and instead of looking at the event that's coming in and trying to do some like understanding of the data that's in there, you basically just use an arbitrary key, which is hash it, and then by modding it, you end up picking your number.
Yes. There is a smarter ways to do it, just for sake of simplicity.
That's actually kind of interesting. Here's the thing. This sounds so simple. It makes me wonder, okay, why didn't anyone think of this already?
Yes.
Is there like a major problem here or what?
Yes, exactly.
The question is what happens to the events though? Because they get sent by the API server, so they're considered as handled. I think this solution would work if all the operators would process all the events, but they would do the mod operation and they would only process the ones that they mod and basically reschedule the ones that they are not targeted for.
No, they're not rescheduling.
Because otherwise, I think the events, I think otherwise the events would be basically considered as sent by the cluster, and they might not get processed at all. I don't know. I'm not sure.
So everybody gets all the events. So the second again mods it, and it will process all the events. You don't have to, because it's a WebSocket. It's not a queue. So you don't have to requeue it. Everybody gets all the events, and this is just the simplest version. I will show you the next steps, how even to optimize this, to not receive all the events everywhere. But but this is the idea that everybody receives all the events. It just drops it. It doesn't even cache it in the informer, the related custom resource, if not necessary. There are some tweaks to have to implement that in the informers, but basically the idea is that everybody gets all the events. It just drops the events which are not consistent with this formula.
Yeah,
and
but
then
is the cluster broadcasting the events or sending them peer-to-peer though? I mean,
it's broadcasting. It's broadcasting.
It's broadcasting. You're sure about that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, well then that works. Yeah. Then.
And the only thing is that came to my mind that I was thinking about an hour, but Jesus said that it is so simple. Then why it's not done yet?
Yeah, exactly. But I was like, wow, this is actually clever. I like this. Let's do this. Wait, why hasn't this been done? What is missing here?
Yeah, and to be honest, I was okay. So there are. I think this is just I have 2-3 approaches on paper, and this is the simplest. So we'll document it in the issue, and maybe ask others and what they think of it. And again, the other smart. So the problem is here that if you scale up, and you want to implement also horizontal output autoscaler or something, then it breaks in the sense that then it's modulated, should be modified for, and should be restart all the operators, or the operator should be restarted. So there is also
I think there's a problem actually now that I think of it, because that works if you only have to deal with one kind of resources, right? Because if you have to deal with the dependent resources of your primary resource, then you have to make sure that those get hashed. I mean, the ideas of those dependent resources get hashed to the same controller as the primary ones.
Yes, but that's again not a problem, because you just everything you had to do is just a filter in the informers, and all the informers or all the event sources or its sources in control runtime. You have just had the same filter for the resources having here, because we are in every resource, we are mapping to a resource ID. That's why this is a resource ID. So you hash the resource ID, which is in our case, it's, I think, resource key in control runtime. We all the time mapping it to a resource ID if it's coming from different sources. So that's why we hash the resource ID. So if it's even a dependent resource, we just always calculate now the resource ID, hash that resource ID which is calculated, and then decide if we ignore it or not. That's why maybe we will need so yeah, basically that's the idea. We could solve it with a very generic filter, which is not there. We have just filters for individual services, but
yeah, but that part also, however, that part, the resource ID part, it means that it hits the controller already.
But it fits it.
That means that the controllers will do work for every resource that they possibly don't care about.
Basically, they will just drop it. Yes. So they will receive the event, check if it's valid. If it's not, just drop it, don't cache it. But the whole reconciliation and the threading and everything could be scaled up. Only overhead, and I will answer that, Chris, after how to deal with this problem, to not even receive it. That's with that could be handled with admission hooks. So the admission controller, we could say that if we create a custom resource or a dependent resource. Okay, and this is I not thought through absolutely this part, but we could. But the idea is just this. So you will create an admission controller that you will pre-process the hashing. So again, there is a problem a little bit with if you want to have dynamic auto scaling, but that's actually not that common, I think, in some clusters. So. There is a way to also deal with that case, but we could say that we have admission mutation webhook. Let's call it mutation webhook. That will already put a label there. Do the same hashing as here, and put a label like operator ID or something. Jesus. Sorry. I cannot write in this box. I don't know what's happening. Something broken with it. Okay, but basically you get the idea that we prepare here the prehash the ID, resource ID, and put a label with that hash. That the operator, I don't know, ID. And that again will be a number from 1 to 3 in this case without the 4. So, and then we can have all the informers have a label selector that I just want to listen in all the informers here for the events and for the resources which contain the label operator ID. And for the dependent resources, we create them in the operator. So we can already put this label when we're creating them. So in this case, with this approach, we won't receive all the events. We will just receive the events appropriate to the number of the operator. I don't know if this is basically if this is clear how I mean it or I explain it. Basically,
in this case, what I understood you say is that instead of having to do the hash in the operators, you could have a webhook that for every event adds a label, which tells it giving it a number, and then that the operators themselves can look, hey, do you have operator ID? Does it match mine? If so, I operate on it. Otherwise, I ignore it.
Yes, I already queried the Kubernetes API server with the label selector that said,
Okay.
give me the resources which have operator ID, my ID, like 1
Okay.
in this 2. So I received just
then at that point, you're not doing a hash necessarily in the operators themselves. You're just looking for their matching ID. And the mutation webhook, that could have done a hash or whatever mechanism it wants. But okay.
Yes. And basically it needs to be just done on create. So when you create the custom resource. I mean, again, this is a static case when you don't do horizontal auto scaling or something like that. But we know that there will be we want to have 3 operators because when we have this number of users, 3 will handle. This is a sample scenario. Again, this can be then improved with autoscalers, but a little bit more complicated. But again, yes.
What happens though if one of the operators in the set fails?
It's a stateful set, so the stateful set again creates it to the same number. So it restarts it as it would be 1. The stateful sets have this property that when they restart it, they receive the same identity again.
Would they still get the events that were missed? I think they do.
I mean, they will again receive all the events from us. So as we do now, if we restart now an operator, then we process all the events. We check the observed generation and things like that, but we process all the events.
So if operator 3 goes away, then the stateful set is going to bring 3 back. But in that time, there could have been events that came in. They would not have been processed.
Yes, but this is the same now.
In theory, they would have they get resent at some point.
Sorry? No. It will ask for in that case, we ask for all the resources.
Oh, you ask for them when you come back up. Okay.
Yes.
That's fair.
Yeah. I mean, this could be combined with the leader action that a little bit complicates it more. But yes. So there is no correctness problem there.
I know this comes up a lot in terms of how to scale operators. I mean, we've had folks on the Ansible side ask, like, how do we scale it? Because they know how to do this with Ansible by itself. But when it's using an Ansible operator, how do they do it? Same thing with Go. Some folks have come hey, I've got this operator I want to run. I want to scale it, and we've largely not had a real answer for anyone. So, no, this is kind of neat.
So I will put in on an issue, maybe on some blog post, and basically wanted to say that if even we do a horizontal pod autoscaler, so we put there later a spin up of Word, the motivation webhook actually can take a look on that and do some more smart things regarding to that, and there's some consistent hashing and things like algorithms, classic, which are dealing with this. I think it might be applicable here. So even the auto-scaling part could be done quite nicely. Basically, if you think about it, same thing happens in a load balancer when somebody wants to have a load balancer and just add a new instance, but there is sticky sessions in the load balancers. If you remember it from old ages and you still use sticky sessions, then but Amazon load balancer still supports it, right? So it's just we make the same way as the Amazon load balancers does with sticky sessions. Just
maybe it could be implemented with taints, like the same mechanism that's used by Kubernetes to schedule work on nodes. So I don't know if that could work, if that same approach could work here.
I think that's a complementary stuff to taint. I mean, not sure how you mean it, but
well, you can. I mean, I'm by far not an expert on that part, so maybe I'm talking out of my ass. But from what I understand, you can create taints to make sure that basically your application is scheduled on a given node, right? So maybe we could maybe leverage something similar to, instead of scheduling, I mean, doing the scheduling on nodes, to schedule on operator instances. I don't know, maybe, like I said, maybe I'm just rambling and I don't know.
I'm not sure if yeah.
So you said you were going to create a blog post or post this somewhere and kind of start a discussion.
Yes.
Okay.
First an issue, and then today and simple, and then better explain it in a blog post.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see getting feedback from various Kubernetes folks to kind of find out why this would not work.
Yes,
if at all. I mean, because like I said, like you mentioned, you said it's simple, and I'm looking at this, I'm like, yeah, seems really simple. Why is this not a common approach? And I feel like I'm missing something either really obvious in Kube that prevents this, or maybe just folks left, because there were so many flexible ways in Kubernetes to do something, maybe they just kind of left it up as, we don't give a guidance, and yeah, this is fine, this is one approach. Yeah, I mean, who knows?
I think this is a stateful set.
But yeah, I know exactly how you're feeling, because it's kind of like, I mean, there's a lot of smart people in Kubernetes. How come we're not doing this all the time?
Yes, exactly. I'm a little bit afraid to put it in the issue, to be honest. Don't embarrass myself.
Exactly. Because either somebody could, I mean, yeah, because you feel like the first response will be like, what? Clearly you never use Kubernetes. No, you can't do that. Yeah, I know exactly how you feel, but I like this conversation. No, that's a good idea. I mean, it's worth exploring, and I'll actually was going to reach out to Joe. He's not here today. He's got other things, but Joe Lanford from the SDK and OLM folk, and I was going to bring this up with him, and just to kind of talk through it a little bit too. And if once you get an issue, I'll definitely point him to it, and that way he could read it as well. I'd like to kind of run this through just to kind of get his idea of why this would not work. Just kind of get that confirmation from someone who wouldn't think it's a silly question.
Okay. Yeah, true. I know him actually. I contacted with him some.
Yes, I know you have talked to him either in here and in Kubernetes operators. So
yes.
he could be a resource too to talk to. Just kind of like, so am I crazy? Am I missing something?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Again, so yeah. Okay, so that's it. So again, it's a little bit more problematic with auto-scaling. I will probably put it there too. And but that's it. So that's the idea. And there is a more complex way to do it, I think, but that's for another time. If this works, I think we shouldn't even think about that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay.
The other one you mentioned earlier was the testing that people were asking for. What kind of testing were they asking for? Anything specific, or is it like across the board? Because there's a variety of, I know that we had to deal with a bunch of testing, and there are currently like 3 types of testing that the SDK operator framework SDK allows folks. One is that env test that KubeBuilder uses as well, that kind of allows you to test the operator locally, but through kind of a fake API server that the env test starts. Then there's either GoMega or one of the other Go testing frameworks for just unit testing the code. When you just want to do, hey, you've got some utility methods, I don't need a cluster or an API server running. And then the other one we offer that some folks have been using for like integration testing is the scorecard feature from the operator framework. We're actually looking to try to make that so that you don't have to be necessarily an SDK project to still use scorecard. We've actually got folks in Red Hat QE that are wanting to use it to test. We've actually got other teams that are writing tests in scorecard. And the way you write a test in scorecard is you write it in an image, and then scorecard will run that image on the cluster with your operator and kind of, test your operator in a cluster. So it's a little more heavy-handed for the longer like integration test, not something a developer would run locally, not necessarily. It can be. But those are just some of the ones. So I was just curious if they were looking for something specific, like just unit testing right now, or just it was open-ended. They'd like to know how you test.
I think, yes, they want, Jonathan, I think I'm not sure if you are here, you are also asking for this. And I think it's such a generic patterns how to test it. Okay. And some description, but basically we have all the 3 you mentioned, or so we a unit and the standard test pyramid applies here. So unit test, integration test, and end-to-end test. We cover all of them. We just don't showcase them this into our sample operators. We just do all those 3 already for the core, and we'll do integration tests for just not really explicitly on our sample operators. It's just in the how we are integration testing, for example, in the core itself. Right. We have tens of them, but it's not very useful, user-friendly to check those. So I guess we have to first put their test for the current operators, or sample operators, and show that these are the 3 layers, how you can cover it with tests. So it's very obvious that. And I was thinking on one more approach to support this more explicit, but then I thought it's not that useful. So somehow make it easy to just propagate a kind of integration test that propagate you random events, not random, but events, and model better certain situations. But I think that's the next step after we already showcase the testing. Yeah. So it's more like showcasing. It's not that we miss something, in my opinion.
Right. I didn't think it was a miss. I was just wondering what the questions are. And but if it's across the board, then that means there's opportunity for a variety of different approaches to show and answer. But yes, and this is actually a good the observation I take from folks asking about the testing piece, that means that the user base has already figured out how to use this project with creating operators and developing them. So that means the community is what's the term, maturing and going to the next step, starting to ask about scaling, starting to ask about testing. Because like when we first started with the operator framework SDK, most of the questions were, okay, how do I create an operator? How do I do some of the basic stuff? And lately in our community meetings as well, we've gotten issues in terms of like, what are some of the best practices for operators? What's the best way of doing this? How do I scale this? How do I better test this? So that it's nice to see that it's also happening on this side, and it's not just an anomaly that we were seeing. So that's cool. Thank you. I think we went through the. Were there any other? Well, let me just bring it up, and it'll be easy enough to do. Go back to this. Okay. Let me go ahead and bring that up.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
Jonathan.
finally.
I'm sorry.
No, it's my fault because, oh man, this Fedora, the Thunderbolt and everything, and I never know which is the microphone that every application is using. So my fault. Sorry. Okay. No, I wanted to mention that, yes, it's Artila was mentioning several things about testing, and what I can say is that I've been working these few days, weeks on the testing for our operator for Keycloak, and what I've experienced is not that the technical layer doesn't do things, but that I don't really know well the technical layer in order to accommodate my tests. So having, I assume people are experiencing the same. So they want to test their operator, and what do they do? So the guides, I think it's the most important thing in this case, not the technical features, because you can test, but so for instance, I've needed to do some things just because the tests need to create a namespace every time that the test starts, but delete the test in the end. But those things are things that I'm doing because I have created a class for my tests. So probably the SDK should have those utilities that you simply, I don't know, for Quarkus, you simply create a new Quarkus cluster or Quarkus SDK test, and that thing does everything for you. And you only focus on your tests because a namespace is created, the operator is instantiated for every time, the Kubernetes client is created with the namespace, so that the SDK gives that for you.
Well, the JUnit extension, that's what it does. I mean, that's
the extension. Yeah, but the extension has, let's say, a problem that the extension, I was working with the extension, but the extension cannot use, for instance, injection. And there's a problem of a Quarkus test and the extension. So if you have a pure JUnit test, then it's fine because I used it. But if you are using a Quarkus test, the JUnit extension starts before the Quarkus context, so then you don't have injection there. That's something that you are missing.
Okay, and why does it matter to do it in a Quarkus test?
Well, because Well, because you have conveniences from the Quarkus test. You have injection, you have configs that you can inject, and so on.
Yeah, that's true.
And the configuration manager service, or a name like that, that you need to inject when you create an operator, it's already created if you have a Quarkus test. If not, you need to create that too, and that complicates things. That's one thing. At the moment, and also there's one thing that I discovered today, because we introduced shared informers, and man, there's no way to test that if you are relying on the CDI creation of the operator and the startup event for the thing. So I needed to create a Quarkus main to have the operator created manually, and then everything works. So I assume that people are going to experience all these particularities, and if the SDK can provide something already done, and if you want to test, you need to do this, and this, that's fine. For the moment, we have local testing connecting to Minikube running in the machine, and a remote testing that with Quarkus, it builds the image, deploys the image to Minikube, and then starts the test. But my next step is to also use a kind cluster with a test containers resource, and then your test doesn't need an external Minikube or an external cluster, so you can use the test containers cluster for everything. That would be my next step to check. But I would say this, in the end, you can test, but you invest a lot of time sorting or doing workarounds for several things, that probably because I don't have enough knowledge on the technology. That's also my problem.
Okay, that makes sense. No, that's actually good feedback, because that was kind of where I was wondering, like, is it a lack of tooling or something else? But it sounds like the first thing to get over is explaining how to test, some of the how to, just the hows to help folks, and then that can go on. Based on that, then follow-on questions could be more advanced questions that we could deal with, and then from that, often tooling can be created depending on what the questions were. But it sounds like right now it's a lack of guide or guidance right now. So that's good feedback.
Okay.
That's awesome. We've got 9 minutes. I think I'm just going to go real quick to see if there's any blocking issues. Okay, I have a PR for this one. I have to test it with the operator framework. Chris, I LGTM'd yours this morning. I'm going to merge yours now. So that update's done, then I can plan a release for the plugins. I think we went through the issues. Already. I think you already went through these, right, Attila? Yeah, because we talked about this and the showcase. Okay. Cool. There's nothing else on that agenda. So we have 8 minutes left. We could either end it here, or unless there's something else someone wants to talk about for the next 8 minutes. All right. I will take silence as we can end here. I appreciate everyone here. Thank you for joining again. Great discussions. Attila, I give you props for being able to use the diagram tool on the fly and putting that picture together, because the whole time I'm thinking, dude, what is he clicking on? How would he do that? I could draw it on my paper on my notebook. I wrote it on my notebook really fast, but good job.
Hey,
Yes.
may I say something for ending the meeting?
Sure.
So we are saying that people are lacking guidance or guides. And well, I also wanted to share with you that we are in the call for papers open for JVC and Conf. So I expect some of you to send papers. But apart from that, we could use, I don't know, the Java user group that I'm also leading, in order to have a serial of talks talking about how to do proper things with operators using the operator SDK. So I mean, these best practices to create operators can be a series of mini events, providing guidance to people. That would be, at least for me as a user, it could be awesome.
No, that is a great idea. I mean, I know that on the operator framework side, we've been talking about that very need. So now, before you said papers sending for what?
JVC and Conf, the conference that I organized for in Barcelona. So this year is on site. Attila already has the link. If I will ping you if you want. I will ping. I will send you the link too.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. That's awesome. I reached out to a local user group here in North Carolina, Java user group, and one of the Kubernetes groups to see because one of our goals this year is to get more talks done, from various levels. And I haven't heard back from them, but I was going to check back with them to see, because I think I would like to do a talk over there to just kind of talk operators. And I'll let you know if there's any remote event, and maybe we could get you guys as guest speakers as well for some of like the Java user group one when I find out more information. And we could always rehash talks that you've already done. So
yeah, I just did one last night at my local jug on the Java operator SDK actually. So
awesome.
That's perfect.
And I'm talking at a conference next week as well on the same topics.
In French?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Not sure. I don't know if it will be recorded anyway, but yeah. I mean, at least regarding your point, Jonathan, is I mean, at least for me, and maybe it's slightly different for Attila, but I'm not in the business of writing operators, so I actually don't know what the best practices are. Because I'm not writing operators. I'm just writing the SDK, right? So it's tricky for me to tell people, okay, do this or do that, because I have no idea if that's actually what is the best thing to do.
I see your point. I see your point, Chris, but I assume that the one that is providing the technology is also knowing that probably that way is one of the best ways to do something. So I know what you mean, but so the team that is creating the Java operators SDK for sure knows how to do things. Probably you don't have a field experience. Jesus probably can provide a lot of that and knows a lot of people with field knowledge. But in this case, I think that you have a lot of knowledge about how to do things, not probably the field experience, but so what I mean is that those kind of talks should provide more than guidance on using the operator SDK, is more guidance on creating operators, for how testing them. And the operator SDK, Java or Go, is simply a tool, but the goal of the talk should not be the tool, but the concept about how to do things for operators. And then also we can provide two tools, and we are going to show examples with those tools. But the goal should be the best practices for do several things. My point.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. So I know folks that can offer that. I know that on the operator framework side, we tend to struggle sometimes, but I think one of the struggles is the lack of confidence when in reality, like you said, Jonathan, we are writing a tool. Clearly, we know more than the average person. And that's the part we need to remember is the average person a lot of time doesn't understand. And helping with even if we gave them minimal guidance based on how to use the software we just wrote, that will often be much better than nothing. And so yeah, that's something that I mean, I just had that epiphany now that you mention it, that we could probably do something on our end as well with the Go side, just to kind of help people get better at that. So, but you know, that's great feedback. So, but yeah, there is actually, let's see. Sorry, I lost a train of thought. Thanks for the sharing. I think that's good. I think having conversations and talks with different user groups, if you guys keep us updated on which ones you've done, and if you have any to share, that would be great. We could add that to either the agenda here, or maybe we can come up with a site on the project that kind of list a bunch of the talks that we've done from this group and help each other. So I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you very much. Have a good rest. Have a good rest of your week,
folks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.